So, today I'm going to talk about what the place of Ambridge is, its identity as a place, and how the residents go about, how they're active in making that identity too. And this is one of the main areas of my research, and it's a sector called placemaking. Does what it says on the tin anyway. Placemaking is both an approach and a set of tools that puts the community first in determining what their place looks like and how it functions. It focuses on solving some quite specific problems in a place, and it's a community-led urban design sort of tool, essentially. And this is where my own research sits, but I look particularly at where the arts can be used as a mechanism in this as well. And I'm going to look at some of the cultural aspects of this in this paper. So important to be mindful of in this paper are some of the key facets of placemaking, namely that people in place are the basic unit of placemaking, and this is what makes it different from simply architecture or urban design. It's the real human element in it. Placemaking is carried out by a variety of people, architects, planners, engineers, so on and so forth, but the community is an equal expert in that. They are the expert in knowing what it's like to live in that place, so they're very front and foremost in placemaking. And then how people think about their place, how they talk about it, how they anchor their own sense of self in their place, that's place identity. And when people become to be engaged in a place, they begin to share common goals for that place. They also then begin to steward that place and take care of it. And for some, they'll go on to be involved quite actively in local politics and get quite civically active. So I'm focusing on the rural here, using Ambridge as an example of rural placemaking, because actually placemaking as a whole has tended to focus on urban areas because they're probably deemed a little bit more sexy than a rural area. So this is a really under-researched area, and Ambridge actually can really elucidate onto a new practice of rural placemaking as both a site of learning for rural studies and for placemaking too. And this is also why I chose this quote from Brian for my paper title. And the rural areas aren't set in aspic. I know that I grew up in a rural area, and Ambridge shows us really that a rural identity is one that's in constant flux. It's a place of massive social change. It has top-down policies being forced on it that it has to react to all the time. And we see in Ambridge also that the local community is really active in making what Ambridge is, and its sort of material conditions as well as the lived experience of being in Ambridge. So let's turn to this place called Ambridge now. So these are some of the common things that you will say, if I put it onto the Facebook page, that you associated with what the place of Ambridge was. It's quite interesting there. You've got some real things, like Millennium Wood. You've got some online things there as well about the tweet-along, so I haven't got time to talk about it in this paper, but that virtual identity of Ambridge is a really valid site of placemaking too. And so those are the things there that are sort of active in the creation and expression of an Ambridge sense of place, its place identity. And I guess topographically and spatially, Ambridge is essentially just like any other village up and down the country, but what makes it different are some of those material characteristics of it, and that's what I'll turn to now. Now, I did a place standard for Ambridge. It's an online tool for community development where you answer different questions about your place, and you get this kind of score. Lower ranges are for where there's room for improvement, and higher ranges of where there's not, where the condition is good. And I present these in my poster, and I'll put the full findings of these online as well. So Ambridge public transport leaves a lot to be desired. For example, people having to get lifts with former one-night stands to get anywhere. They have to walk everywhere, as Christy and Michael so eloquently sort of told us last year. And the streets aren't safe either from cars that are speeding or that have a murderous intent. Housing, or the lack of it, especially for the working class, is a big issue, as we have heard, and I will touch on that again in a moment. And overall, the Ambridge place identity score is actually towards the lower end of the scale. It is not this sort of bucolic idyll that perhaps the Ambridge residents themselves may purport it to be. I think it has Okay, anybody that knows me knows that I listen to the Archers because I don't like any of the characters and I like to have a go at them. So Ambridge, I think...
I love Pip!
I really love Pip. Ambridge has this really exaggerated sense of self, I think. It looks down on those outside the village, it's very wary of newcomers, and it has absolutely no critical self-awareness of itself as a village, which leads, I think, to a level of cognitive dissonance amongst the residents. So we know there is some awful interpersonal behaviour between the residents in Ambridge, and yet, of course, when threatened, they would never say that, and they close ranks and they think it's the best place in the world ever. So moving on to some of the placemakings of Ambridge, and I contend that it's got a typology of traditional placemaking and then also contemporary placemaking, and a fair amount of imagined placemaking in it as well. So traditional placemaking. There's lots of things in the annual Ambridge calendar that fit into this section: the village fete, flower and produce show, bonfire on the green, etc., etc. There are some suddenly appearing and disappearing traditions like the wassail here. Me growing up in Somerset, to be really honest, when they had the wassail, that was the lead news item on the TV. It was such a big deal. And it's in Ambridge 1 year and then it goes again. And we've got some invented traditions like the whole heritage of the tumble tussock cider as well. And traditional rural placemaking is really linked to this idea of a rural heritage, and it's linked to the seasons and the land, which of course any rural resident is really kind of codependent on. It's very aware of that, and their livelihoods are dependent on those seasons. And research also finds that a continuity, or that sense of continuity with the past, is really key to an individual's psychological well-being, because they place such a significance on places in the past to maintain that sense of identity. And the pub is a major site of traditional placemaking. They obviously, we all know it, create a sense of belonging for the communities that they serve. And this is particularly true in rural areas, and you see pubs actually going above and beyond the role of just serving alcohol, or not, if somebody's had too much to drink. But they'll be the site as well in a lot of places for the sports club to meet, the book club to meet, so on and so forth. And then contemporary placemaking. We have such hip things as Linda and Elizabeth's guerrilla gardening, the Green Cemetery. The Ambridge Observer has reported on a pop-up open-air cinema near Penny Hassett. The Cider Club could equally be found in Shoreditch as it could in Ambridge, and Lexi and Roy have visited the apparently annual Felpersham street food market. Now, these consumption-orientated activities are seen as a bit of a panacea for rural decline, essentially. Tourism is really key to rural economies as they reimagine, repackage, and represent to a predominantly urban class the idea of, this idea of a rural lifestyle. Now, the future of Ambridge placemaking. It's with Elliotville now. The development and the past, present, and future of Ambridge identity is going to be played out, and there's an opportunity here for a bit of a cash injection to help, improve the condition of the village there too. So we've seen how with Linda, the development and its mention of affordable housing has really brought out the rural living class snob in her, and her really barbed comment on the 16th of August Parish Council meeting of these types of people that would be moving into the affordable housing. This development is drawing out people's fear of change. It's going to be upsetting to the class structure in Ambridge potentially, and the development I think is seen as quite a disconnect to the condition of the land in Ambridge. But there's a need for housing in the village, as we've seen, to keep people living in the village as much as to keep local services and communities alive too. It's quite interesting. I mean, Fallon and Harrison putting themselves in financial hock to move into a house that's too small for them. Is just how desperate the situation is. And there's hidden homeless. The Fair Brothers have been hidden homeless for a while. Jazza has been as well. All the sofa surfing that goes on. Even Lexi having her sort of tied accommodation again. She was still of no fixed abode at that particular time. But we see with Emma the archetypal journey of placemaking played out through her character. She's somebody that has an attachment to place. She's become more aware of its issues of place. And then she's becoming more civically active. So Emma's becoming a place activist. I love this. I think it's brilliant. She's enacting her love of place just as justified as Linda would be as middle-class warrior, or Jenny as the Boudica of Worcestershire. I cannot say Worcestershire, I'm sorry. So the development also, and the newcomers, will bring their own cultural expectations to Ambridge. It will have a huge impact on Ambridge place identity. And also the development offers an opportunity for a bit of cash injection into the village too. So it can do this through Section 106 monies. I'm going to keep it really brief. You could be here all day talking about Section 106 if you wanted to. But it's essentially a planning agreement that's entered into by the local authority and the developer, whereby a percentage of that development value is set aside, Section 106 agreement, and those monies to be spent for the good of the village. And that can be spent on infrastructure things, cultural things. It could go on, supporting a school or what have you. But I'm going to look at what this could possibly look like from a cultural and artistic point of view. So Justin and the Worcestershire Council will have had their own Section 106 agreement. The Parish Council will have a role in determining how that money is spent. So let's look at what that money could be spent on. So we know from the place standard exercise that bus stops are an issue in Ambridge. So we could have some architect-designed bus stops in the village. Huntley on the Scottish borders, and then a town called Wasaic in the States. They've both adopted a whole town as a gallery approach, where there's continuous artistic programming going throughout the year. Marfa in Texas has turned itself into a town-wide public art park. So could we see similar in Ambridge? Just as we've got cities of culture, could we have a village of culture? Could Ambridge win it? Could there be an artist commission for an angel of Lakey Hill? Or could Bartleby be immortalised at Now, Brian wants to sponsor a local event. Rather than having it as Brian Fest, could it be a Water to Blue cheese rolling event? We could capitalise on Linda's love of her busy reading schedule and her event skills to create a literature festival to rival that of Hay. Or could it bring back Locksfest, an annual music event? Just as you see, this is Kendall Calling. Again, it's a huge deal up in that part of the world. So to conclude, Ambridge and place identity. To recap on what we've learnt so far about the place and placemaking at Ambridge. So we've seen how the people of Ambridge are involved in a kind of productive nostalgia. They use placemaking activities such as the markets and fetes and the like to produce and reproduce village life for themselves as much as for any visitor. We've learnt that issues that challenge place identity bring out people's true colours, but they're also something that people can enact their sense of place attachment through and become civically active in the life of the village. And we've seen how the newcomers to Elliotville will both bring their own cultural expectations with them and then could also possibly get involved in local politics, breaking that cabal of political power that we see in Ambridge at the moment. And we've learnt that development monies could be used to fund activities and initiatives that confirm the village's identity and to itself and to others, and to galvanise and revitalise its culture. Now, Ambridge, I think, is a place that projects itself as a rural idyll, as a place of social harmony, apparently, tranquility and safety, and it has a traditional and fixed place identity, or so it would like you to think of it. It has this perversely singular vision of itself, and it really does believe its own hype. The reality of Ambridge, as we all know, is actually very different from that. And through a placemaking prism, we can see that reality of Ambridge, like any rural place, is a place identity is dynamic and it's in constant flux. It's made and remade from the grassroots up, as well as from the top down through policy, and also from society, from all around it. And actually in this, we have, Ambridge offers us a vision of a rural futurism. It sits at the intersection of global, national and local forces. It contests past, present and future all the time.
All right, I'm defending you with my flapjacks.
Sorry? Okay, I'm ready to and it signals really, and this is a quote from Nicola, a graft and grow and not identical cut and paste idea to what a rural community and placemaking is. Thank you.